The first thing I noticed wasn't the car. It was the shoes. I was lying flat on the concrete floor of Bay 4 at Kellerman & Sons Auto, the kind of shop where the fluorescent light above the third lift has been flickering for 2 years, and nobody's fixed it because we keep saying we'll get to it. I was halfway under a 2019 Ford F-150 that was leaking from 2 places it shouldn't have been, and I heard heels on the shop floor. Not the rubber-soled kind, the kind that click. In 11 years at that shop, I'd never once heard heels on that floor. I slid out. She was standing just inside the bay door, holding a phone in one hand and looking around like she'd walked into the wrong building but was too composed to admit it. Late 40s, maybe 50. Dark hair pulled back. Ivory coat that had no business being anywhere near motor oil. Behind her, through the open door, I could see a black Cadillac Escalade idling in the lot, and a man in a suit standing beside it doing nothing useful. "Is there someone named Nate here?" she asked. "That's me." Her name was Claudia Mercer. She said it the way people say their name when they expect you to already know it. I didn't. She told me her car had a noise. Not her Escalade. A different car. A 1968 Mustang Fastback, British racing green, that was sitting in a climate-controlled garage at her estate in Westchester. She'd been told by 3 different shops that the noise was coming from the exhaust. She didn't believe them. "Why not?" I asked. "Because the noise changes with the steering wheel." I looked at her for a moment. "Steering box," I said, "or the column coupler." Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly. More like relief that she'd walked into the right building after all. I need to back up because none of this makes sense without context. My name is Nate Braddock. I'm 41 years old. I've been a mechanic since I was 19. I work Tuesday through Saturday, 6:30 to 4, sometimes later if something comes in at the end of the day, and I don't have the heart to tell a person their car has to wait overnight. I live in a 2-bedroom rental in Tarrytown, New York, about 20 minutes from the shop. The second bedroom belongs to my daughter, Lily, except her name isn't Lily. That's just what I called her when she was small because she had this one stuffed elephant she named Lily, and for about 8 months she referred to herself in the third person by the same name. She's 9 now. Her actual name is June. I still call her Lily sometimes when I forget to be a responsible parent. Her mom and I split up when June was 3. It wasn't dramatic. It was just 2 people who'd married young and grown into strangers. We're fine now. We're better as people who share a kid than we ever were as a couple. June goes to her mom's on alternating weekends and every other Tuesday, and the rest of the time she's with me. I want you to understand what my life looked like before Claudia Mercer walked into Bay 4. It looked like this. I wake up at 5:15. I make June's lunch while she's still asleep. She won't eat the school lunch, I've tried. She says the pizza tastes like cardboard, and honestly I can't argue with her. I drop her at school at 7:40. I drive to the shop. I work. I pick her up at 3:30 on the days she doesn't have soccer. I make dinner. Most nights it's something I've been making for 20 years. Pasta, chicken thighs, tacos on Friday, because Friday should feel like something. We watch TV for an hour. She falls asleep, and I carry her to bed. Which I know I won't be able to do for much longer because she's getting heavier and I'm not getting younger. Then I sit at the kitchen table with whatever's left of my coffee and I either read or stare at nothing for a while. That's it. That's the whole picture. I wasn't unhappy. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't sitting there waiting for my life to change. I liked my life. I liked the shop. I liked the specific feeling of figuring out what's wrong with something that everyone else couldn't figure out. There's a satisfaction in that I've never been able to explain to people who don't do it for a living. The car tells you something's wrong. Your job is to listen until you understand what it's actually saying, not what it sounds like it's saying. That instinct was the reason Claudia Mercer drove 45 minutes to find me. She left a number with my front desk and said she'd send her driver to pick me up the following Saturday. I told her I didn't work Saturdays. She told me she'd pay me for my time. I told her I had my daughter on Saturdays. She said she'd pay me double. I told her that wasn't the issue. There was a pause. I don't think people said no to her very often. Not because she was rude. She wasn't, actually. But because she had the kind of bearing that made people assume she'd already thought through whatever objection you were about to raise and found it manageable. "Bring her," Claudia said finally. "There's a pool." I probably should have just said no. I've thought about that a lot since. It would have been the simpler thing. But I was curious about the car, which is almost always how I get myself into things. Not ambition, not money, just the car. I told her I'd come on Sunday instead, because June was at her mom's on Sunday. The estate was something else. I don't have a better way to say it. I'd driven through parts of Westchester my whole life, and seen the gates and the hedgerows, and thought, abstractly, that wealth like that existed. But there's a difference between abstractly knowing a thing and turning off a 2-lane road onto a private driveway that runs for a quarter mile before you see the house. The garage alone was bigger than the shop I'd worked in for 11 years. A man named Phil, late 50s, quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from years of practice, showed me to the Mustang. It was beautiful. I'm not someone who gets sentimental about cars, but that car was something. The kind of green that's almost black in low light, clean underneath, which meant someone had been taking care of it, even if they hadn't been able to figure out what was wrong. I spent about 20 minutes looking before I touched anything. Claudia came in around the half-hour mark, still in the ivory coat or one very similar to it. She stood at the edge of the garage and watched me work without asking questions, which I respected. I found it in 40 minutes. The intermediate steering shaft had a worn spline at the lower coupler. When you turned the wheel, the slop in the spline was transferring vibration up into the column, and the loose heat shield on the exhaust was resonating in sympathy. Two separate issues that sounded like one. Every shop that looked at it found the exhaust and stopped looking. I showed her. She looked at where I was pointing and then looked at me. How long to fix it? Shaft's going to be the hard part. It's a 68, so I'll have to source the part. Probably a week, maybe 10 days. The heat shield I can do right now if you've got a socket set. Phil produced a socket set. I fixed the heat shield. When I stood up, Claudia was leaning against a workbench with her arms crossed, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. The other shops all said exhaust, she said. The exhaust was making noise. It just wasn't the source. What's the difference? Symptoms and causes, I said. You can fix symptoms all day and the car will still tell you something's wrong. The noise wasn't from where it sounded like it was coming from. The force was transferring through the shaft. That's where the problem actually lived. She was quiet for a moment. That's an interesting way to think about things, she said. She called the shop 4 days later, not to ask about the part. She said she had a friend who was selling a 1971 Chevelle SS, and she wanted to know if I'd look at it before she committed to buying it. A pre-purchase inspection. I said sure. The Chevelle was in Connecticut. She sent the Escalade. I looked at the Chevelle, found significant rust in the rear frame rails that the seller hadn't disclosed and that the photos had been carefully staged to avoid, and told her not to buy it. She thanked me and asked if I wanted lunch. We ate at a place in Westport that had tablecloths and no prices on the menu, which I recognized as a sign that I was somewhere I didn't normally go. I ordered the burger because it was the safest thing I could identify. She ordered a salad and a glass of white wine, and proceeded to ask me about myself for 45 minutes, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I don't know why I answered. I'm not a person who talks about himself easily. But there was something about the directness of her questions. She wasn't performing interest. She was actually interested, and you can tell the difference if you pay attention. I told her about the shop, about June, about the years I'd spent learning to read an engine the way other people learn to read music, pattern recognition, pitch, the specific language of something running wrong. She told me she ran a company. I said what kind? She said logistics, shipping infrastructure, ports, rail corridors, warehousing networks. She said it the way I might say oil changes and brake jobs, like it was just the thing she did. I found out later that her company had contracts with the top 10 freight carriers in North America and that her name had appeared in Forbes 3 years running. At the time, I just thought she was someone who knew a lot about supply chain. It was her company's annual shareholder gala. That's what she called it, a gala, which was a word I'd never personally had occasion to use, and she needed someone to inspect the hangar facility where the event was being held, not for the party. The company had recently acquired a small regional aviation firm, and the hangar was part of the asset package. There'd been some deferred maintenance. She wanted a second set of eyes before the inspection report was finalized and submitted to the board. She called and asked if I had any background with aircraft. I told her my brother-in-law had been an A&P mechanic for 12 years before he got into trucking. I'd spent a lot of time in hangars when we were kids, learning the difference between the way structural metal fails and the way it just wears. It's not the same thing. She said that was enough. She said the aviation inspectors had already signed off. She just wanted someone she trusted to walk through the facility. I didn't think about the word trusted. I should have. The gala was on a Friday night in October at a private airfield in New Jersey, about 30 miles outside of Newark. The event was for board members, major investors, senior executives. 120 people, maybe. The kind of event where the catering costs more than my truck. Claudia sent a car. June was with her mom that weekend, which worked out. I wore the one good blazer I own, which I'd bought for a cousin's wedding 3 years ago, and had since used for exactly 2 occasions. I felt like an actor wearing someone else's costume. I'm a big guy. 6 feet, broad, the kind of build that comes from lifting things for 20 years, and the blazer fit fine, but I still felt it. Phil met me at the hangar door and walked me through the facility about 2 hours before guests arrived. The main structure was a converted regional hangar, capacity for maybe 4 mid-size business jets. For the event, 2 of the bays had been cleared and set up with tables and a stage. The other 2 still had aircraft in them. One was a Cessna Citation that was clearly operational, and one was a Gulfstream that was down for maintenance. The inspection report on the Gulfstream had been finalized. Approved for static display during the event. No flight operations. I walked through the facility and looked at things, mostly because it was what I did. I couldn't help it. It's like asking a plumber not to notice the pipes. I almost didn't look at the Gulfstream. I almost didn't. But I walked past it on my way back toward the event space, and something caught my eye near the aft section. A stain. The kind of stain that comes from something weeping slowly over a long period of time. Not a drip, not a leak, but a seep. On the upper surface of the left horizontal stabilizer attachment, where the stabilizer meets the fuselage. I stopped. I took out my phone and used the flashlight. The sealant around the attachment fitting had failed along about 1.5 inches of its length. Underneath the failed sealant, where the fitting met the structure, there was a faint but unmistakable iridescence, the kind of surface that forms on aluminum that has been under repetitive stress. I'd seen it before. Not on a plane, on a trailer hitch, on a crane arm, on a bridge support in photographs from an NTSB report my brother-in-law had shown me once because he thought I'd find it interesting. I knew what it was. I stood there for a long moment. The plane was down for maintenance. It wasn't going anywhere tonight. The inspection had already been signed off. There was no scheduled flight, and the seep was slow. It had been happening for a while, which meant it had probably been happening when the inspectors came through. They'd signed off anyway. I told myself it wasn't my call. I told myself I was a car mechanic at a party. Then I went and found Phil. Phil found Claudia. Claudia was in the middle of a conversation with 4 people, who all had the particular posture of people who manage large amounts of other people's money. She saw my face and excused herself. I told her what I'd found. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "The inspection was already signed. I know, the plane isn't flying tonight." "I know that too, so why are you telling me?" I thought about how to say it. Because 120 people are about to spend a few hours 20 feet from a structure with a compromised stabilizer attachment. And if someone decides at any point tonight to do something impulsive with an aircraft, and I'm not saying that's likely, the signed inspection report says it's fine, but it's not fine. She held my gaze. Then she said, "What do you need?" "I need you to make sure that plane doesn't move. And I need you to get a different inspector out here, not the one who signed off. Someone independent. That's going to create a situation. I know the company that did the inspection is a vendor relationship. They signed the report 2 days ago. Calling in a second inspector implies the first one missed something. He did miss something." She looked at me for a long time. Behind her, through the glass partition that separated the event setup from the hangar floor, I could see staff arranging centerpieces. Guests were arriving in 30 minutes. I could see the Gulfstream in the second bay, lit by the overhead hangar lights, sitting perfectly still and looking completely fine. That was the thing about it. It looked completely fine. "If I do this," she said quietly, I'm going to have to explain to my board why I halted a pre-approved asset display 2 hours before a major shareholder event, based on the opinion of a man who fixes cars. Yes, I said. That's what's going to happen. And if you're wrong, then I'm wrong, and you've had an awkward night and a vendor relationship gets complicated. I kept my voice level. And if I'm right? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 2 hours ago you asked me what the difference was between symptoms and causes. I remember. You said the force was transferring through the shaft. That's where the problem actually lived. Yeah. So where's the force transferring here? I pointed at the Gulf Stream. Right there. Except this one you can't hear. She made the call. I won't pretend it was seamless. The vendor, a regional aviation services firm that had been contracted with Claudia's new acquisition for 7 years, was not happy. Their lead inspector, who had signed off on the report, was reached by phone and was less happy. There was a conversation somewhere that I wasn't part of that reportedly involved raised voices. An independent inspector from a different firm arrived at the hangar at 8:15. The event was already underway. Guests had champagne. The stage was lit. The inspector took 40 minutes. He found the failed sealant and the stress marking that I'd found. He also found a secondary issue. A hairline crack in the aft pressure bulkhead, behind the baggage compartment, that had been documented in a prior maintenance log and noted as monitor. It had progressed beyond the monitor threshold. The plane had a maintenance note that said monitor, on a crack that had stopped being monitorable. The original inspector had not checked the prior maintenance logs in detail. He'd done a visual of the exterior and signed the report. Claudia was told the results quietly, while the event continued around her. She came and found me at a table near the back where I'd been sitting with a glass of water and feeling fairly out of place. She sat down. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "The crack was in the maintenance logs. The prior inspection firm had flagged it. The inspector tonight didn't pull the full logs." "Okay," I said. "If this plane had been used, and we had been considering moving it under its own power to another facility next month, the FAA would have had questions. More than questions," I said. She nodded slowly. More than questions. I went home that night around 11. Drove back over the bridge in the dark, the kind of Friday night where you can see the Hudson from the span and the lights from the shore make the water look like it's moving faster than it is. I had the window down. I was thinking about nothing in particular, which I think means I was probably thinking about everything. June called me the next morning from her mom's. She wanted to tell me that she'd seen a dog at the park that was dressed in a raincoat. She described the raincoat for approximately 4 minutes. It was yellow. It had a hood. The dog seemed to tolerate it. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and listened. "How was your thing last night?" she asked eventually, the way kids do when they're being polite but mostly waiting to get back to the dog. "It was okay," I said. "I found something that needed finding, like when the Henderson's car made that noise. Sort of like that. Did you fix it?" I thought about that. "I flagged it," I said. "Someone else will do the actual fix." "Oh." A pause. "Is that still good?" "Yeah," I said. "I think that's still good." Claudia called me 3 weeks later. The original inspection firm had lost the account. There was an internal review at Claudia's company about how maintenance vendors were being vetted. The Gulfstream had gone to a certified facility, had the stabilizer sealant properly replaced, the bulkhead crack repaired and documented, and had received a clean inspection report from a different firm. She said she wanted to talk about something. We met at the same place in Westport with the tablecloths and no prices. I ordered the burger again. She had the salad again. She told me she was creating a position, not a job in the traditional sense, more of an advisory contract. Her company was in the process of acquiring 2 more aviation-related assets, and she'd realized in the past few weeks that what she actually needed wasn't more inspectors. She had inspectors. What she needed was someone who could walk through a facility the way I walked through a facility, looking not just at what the report said, but at what the structure was saying. "Symptoms and causes," she said. "I'm a car mechanic," I said. "I know what you are. I also know what you did 3 weeks ago. I looked at a plane and told you what I saw. You looked at something that everyone else had already signed off on," she said, "and you didn't let that stop you from saying what you saw. Do you know how rare that is?" I didn't say anything. "The vendor relationship pressure," she said. "The signed report. The timing. The fact that you were there as a guest, essentially, not an employee. The fact that raising the issue was going to create complications. She looked at me. A lot of people see all of that and they decide the signed report is probably fine. The signed report wasn't fine. No, she said, it wasn't. We sat there for a while. I'm not an aviation professional, I said. Whatever contract you're thinking about, you need to be clear-eyed about that. I'm not hiring you to be an aviation professional. I'm hiring you to be you. I took the contract. It took me 2 weeks to say yes, which I think annoyed her, though she was polite about it. I talked to my brother-in-law, who told me I was an idiot if I didn't do it. I talked to my boss at Kellerman & Sons, who told me the same thing and then immediately asked if I could still cover Tuesday through Thursday because they were short-staffed. I worked out something part-time. I talked to June. June asked if it meant I would travel sometimes. I said it might. She thought about this. Would you bring me things, she asked. From places? What kind of things? Keychains, she said immediately, like she'd been waiting for this conversation. But not the boring kind. The kind that have something on them. I can do that. Okay, she said. Then it's fine. That was the whole conversation. 9 years old and she'd negotiated herself a souvenir clause and called it a day. I've been asked since then. By my brother-in-law, by a couple guys at the shop, once by a reporter who was doing a piece on Claudia's company and somehow ended up with my name. Whether I knew what I was doing that night, whether I understood the stakes, whether I made some kind of calculated decision. I didn't. I saw something that didn't look right. I'd spent enough time around metal under stress to know that the thing that looks fine from 5 feet away is not always fine when you get close. I'd learned that from cars. I'd learned that the seep is almost always older than the leak. I'd learned that signed paperwork doesn't change what the structure is actually doing. The truth is, I wasn't thinking about the vendor relationship, or the event, or what it would mean if I was wrong. I wasn't thinking about impressing Claudia Mercer, or about any kind of future. I was thinking about a stain on a horizontal stabilizer that shouldn't have been there. That's the whole decision. It wasn't noble. It was just that I didn't know how to look at something that wasn't right and pretend I hadn't seen it. I've never been able to do that. It's gotten me in trouble before, and I suspect it will again. But it's also the only thing I actually know how to do. June got her first keychain 4 months later, from a trip I made to inspect a warehousing facility in Portland, Oregon. It had an enamel Bigfoot on it holding a tiny coffee cup. She attached it to her backpack the same day and informed her class the following Monday that her dad traveled for work now. I still work at the shop on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I still make her lunch at 5:15. I still carry her to bed, even though my back has started to register a formal complaint. Some things you hold on to not because they make sense, but because they're yours. She asked me once, about 6 months after that night in the hangar, whether I thought I was lucky. We were driving home from soccer. It was raining. The wipers on my truck are slightly out of sync with each other, which I'm aware of and keep meaning to fix and somehow never do. I don't know, I said. Maybe. I think you are, she said, because you saw the thing. What thing? The thing that was wrong. She was looking out the window. You saw it when other people didn't. That's lucky. I thought about telling her it wasn't luck, that it was attention, years of it, the habit of looking past what something appears to be and listening for what it's actually saying. I thought about telling her that the skill and the instinct are the same thing, that you can't separate them. But she'd already moved on, because there was a dog outside the soccer complex wearing a rain jacket, and it was not the same dog from before, but it was a similar jacket situation. I let her tell me about the jacket. Some things don't need explaining. They just need noticing.